Welcome back to another episode of our in-depth look at the exotic and unique machinery we find around the Monster Energy Supercross pits. Hey, I'm Michael Lindsay, and today we will be taking a look at Chase Sexton's Team Honda HRC CRF450R Works Edition. This bike is, of course, maintained by Brandon Zimmerman, who is in his second year working for Chase Sexton. He was brought onto the team towards the end of 2021 to work for Chase after a prior stint in-house at Factory Kawasaki, and before that, he was at Pro Circuit with Adam Cianciarulo and other riders. After talking to Zim, we learned a few things about what Chase looks for in a setup. First off, Chase, unlike a lot of top pros, is not particularly picky at all about his controls or any of the real setup things that we find the guys worrying about. He said realistically he can set the levers and bars at whatever kind of position he thinks is about right, and he said Chase is pretty much on point with just jumping on the bike and being able to ride it. He said it particularly comes in handy if Chase does have an incident in a race. He said he's not too worried about if a lever gets bent or if the bars are a little bit crooked. He said that he's able to adapt pretty quickly. He did say that what Chase is picky for is more about his setup, and things that we have heard Chase talk about many times in interviews lately is the bike balance. He is very sensitive to the rear end being too high and too low, and he said that's really where a lot of the focus goes into. He said that Chase's biggest thing is that he grips the bike so heavily in places that that's where a lot of wear and tear comes up. So things like seat covers, side panels, wears through those types of items. They've even had to add a brace behind the radiator shrouds on each side of the bike. He said particularly in outdoors when the bike gets hot and the plastics start to bow a little bit with heat, and as tight as Chase will grip the motorcycle, he will actually permanently bow in those radiator shrouds on the bike. So a couple little things unique like that. However, we notice unlike the 250s under the HRC 10, he does not have the little kind of winglet carbon fiber pieces coming off the back of the frame on each side to grip onto. When again asking Zim about that, he said that Chase tested those last year, but based on where he grips the motorcycle with his legs, he didn't feel much of an advantage, or really any advantage of all, of running those. He seems to grip it more directly on the frame itself. Something unique we notice about his controls is a Delran Tube on the left side grip, similar to the backside of a throttle tube. When we asked him, he said it's because Chase grips in so tightly on the grips with the inside of his hands, and that the grips are so soft, he was actually rolling over the left side grip and getting that material kind of between his fingers. So by making that Delran Tube, they basically supported the backside of the grip on the left side, similar to how a throttle tube typically supports your right side grip. Getting into some of the big performance items we noticed on the bike, one of them being the large plates that are welded on each side of the frame. These are going from the cradle area up to the steering stem along the entire side of the head tube on both the left and right side that have been just kind of tack welded into place. These braces are not exactly new. After talking to Brandon Zimmerman and Chase Sexton in an interview last week, we learned that this frame was actually available to the team last year, and that it was the HRC Japanese side that came up with this, and it has been run by Tim Geiser in MXGP. Last year, though, Chase stated that the type of energy change it made to the frame would overwhelm the rear end of the bike too much, and he wasn't able to get a good setting on it. He tried it both in Supercross and outdoors, and he mentioned that Ken Roczen actually raced it briefly. This year, though, with the advancements they've made with their settings, trying to get the balance that Chase has been looking for, and by going to the BFRC shock, they feel like they have enough rear holdup that they've been able to utilize this frame adjustment. The bracing here does not actually make the front end more rigid to hand field, it transfers the energy to the back half of the bike differently. So Chase said the majority of the improvement he feels is rear end feel and also stability of the motorcycle, which he says the biggest thing that he has been looking for. Again, this goes back to his want of balance and stability in the bike. Another unique item we notice with the handling is different engine mounts. They may look stock at first glance, but the upper mounts are actually made of steel instead of aluminum, and the team commented to us that they've recently even gone thicker on those steel mounts and have had them made 1 millimeter thicker than the ones they had been using prior. They are also mounted to the bike by steel hardware, and there's other steel hardware found throughout the bike. Unlike some factory teams, the HRC guys are not running titanium axles, they're actually running steel axles and a steel swing arm pivot. We also notice other miscellaneous steel hardware, again, such as the engine bracket mounting points along with certain linkage bolts. Having personally tested this in the past, yes, steel and titanium make a very big difference in feel on certain load points of the bike. Typically, steel has more of a comfort character, and definitely in this case, Chase seems to prefer it. On the suspension side of things, something that started out the season as a little bit of a shock is Chase Sexton moving to the BFRC Showa rear shock. The BFRC stands for Balance Free Rear Cushion. It is a shock system that has been utilized by Honda's MXGP team for 8, 9, almost 10 years now, and runs off a little bit different theory than a standard shock system. At the beginning of the year, we had Chase Sexton and Colt Nichols aboard it, along with the factory Kawasaki teammates of Jason Anderson and Adam Cianciarulo. But as of the time of recording this video, before round 5, Chase is actually the only one left running it. He really prefers the balance on the shock and has definitely been a big improvement for him in outdoors and indoors this year. Of course, Chase is a little bit taller than your standard rider. His bar mount position is a little bit taller on the Works Honda clamps than seen on the stock bike, but not drastically. The biggest difference is the fact that he has a minus 10mm back foot peg bracket on his bike. And this combines with two of the most exotic parts we see on this motorcycle, the Works HRC foot pegs and foot peg brackets. They're all made of titanium with a titanium pin. These are rumored to be upwards of $5,000 per motorcycle to equip them based on the team's cost. And there's a ton of options here. They have everything from 5 to 10 mil back, 5 mil 10 down, and combinations in between there, different offsets with the foot peg itself, many things like that to get the guys comfortable. We also see that with the triple clamps with tons of bar mount options and bar mount hole options. And the team also has a slew of offsets, everywhere from probably 18, 19 mil up to 24 mil in 1 mil to half mil increments. They keep that guarded pretty close to their chest. We do know that they have a lot of options. And then finally, one they have enacted in some different years with the generations of their bike is sometimes they will change the rake of the bike by inserting a different steering stem that is thinner that allows them to run offset races. At the moment, based on the information we've heard, we'd either guess the bike is very close to stock offset and rake, if not maybe slightly farther out within mil and a half on offset, maybe a small change on the rake. But again, that's information that is fairly closely guarded. Another item from the outside that people will notice this year is the inclusion of GET electronic systems. This is actually something we misquoted recently in some of our features. We thought that both the 250 and 450 team had moved over to GET ECUs. This is actually incorrect. Only the CRF450R of the Lawrences and Chance Hymas has moved over to full GET electronics. The 450 just has the RPM indicator that we see, and they're running the branding. However, all the data acquisition system in the bike is still 2D systems, which they've been using for many years, and quite a few other factory teams such as Husqvarna and Kawasaki have utilized. They're also still utilizing a factory key-in ECU, which is tuned through the support of HRC technicians. So this is still a sealed system, not an aftermarket thing like we see with GET. However, yes, the CRF450Rs are running GET data systems and ECUs. Another item that we noticed that is very odd on the bike is the wedge on the CMT carbon skid plate. And one note before that, this is not the CMT Italian carbon company we are used to seeing. This is actually a US-based company here in California, CMT, that does specific carbon projects for race teams, underwater camera housings, and different items such as sort. And actually, the guy who creates these is a member of the Vinyl MX forum. But this spec of skid plate has been made just for HRC, and occasionally, when the guy has leftovers, you can buy one, but they are not cheap. Now back to the wedge we noticed on the left side, our first thought is it had to do something with protecting the shift lever. We know that Chase commented to us after San Diego that he had run into a few occasions where he's leaning over so far in ruts in Supercross that he has actually caught his shifter and accidentally upshifted coming out of corners. This wedge is basically cutting a trough through corners and allowing the shift lever a position to go through the dirt without actually catching. And as crazy as that sounds, I said since they've implemented this wedge, Chase has not had the problem he did at the first round or two. One other item we noticed very unique on the bike is the Yoshimura exhaust system. The can is slightly shorter than the spec they used last year to try to bring in the weight a little more centered on the motorcycle. And then also the head pipe spec is quite long on this bike, a little bit longer than the standard Works Edition head pipe we see with the resonance chamber. This all has to do with their engine package, which, speaking of that engine package, and of course, this is a total in-house Honda project. They do work with aftermarket companies such as Wiseco, but again, a lot of what's in this engine, the transmission aspect ratios, the crank, the rod, the cam spec, all of that are HRC components, things that again are kept very quiet, but yes, they are massaged and modified from stock. As with most 450s, they aren't looking for the most radical power these days. It isn't as extreme as you'd think, but it's all about moving the power around to where these guys need to be the most efficient. Unlike the 250Fs, there is no electric water pump on the bikes. They aren't looking for the most outright power, so it still uses a standard mechanical impeller attached to the engine. We see a slew of parts we're used to seeing related to the HRC squad, such as the billet Nissan brake caliper, which they are still using a standard 260mm sized rotor, Renthal bars, arc levers, Renthal grips, Renthal sprockets, DID chains and DID rims, along with the Works Honda hubs, and just, again, a little splash of Twin Air, Pro Honda oils, things of that nature that we are used to seeing. Albeit, if you look at the engine sight glass on an HRC bike, you'll notice a little bit different tinge on the color of oil, and that's usually a good giveaway of what's actually maybe inside. One of the last little aftermarket pieces we spot on the bike, something a couple years ago, is the HRC squad actually went away from their own Works whole shot device to the much more simplified version made by Works Connection, which is of course very plentiful throughout the paddock, along with using Works Connection stands for their bikes in their pit areas. Lastly, the bike is adorned with throttle jockey graphics. This is a company that the HRC team has been working with for more than 20 years at this point. There's quite a bit to always look at when it comes to factory HRC equipment, so if you want to learn more about these bikes, make sure you check out our weekly Pit Bits feature on VitalMX.com. It is a weekly written and photo feature we do with all the latest parts we see update on bikes. It allows us to track changes with each of the machines throughout the year. Also just new cool graphics, helmets, goggles, things like that pop in there. If you haven't checked it out, make sure you do. It's probably the best feature we put out every single week. If you like this, give us a thumbs up, like, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.